Genesis chapter 40, verses 1 through 23. Sometime after this, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt committed an offense against their lord, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. He put them under custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he was responsible for them. They stayed in prison for some time. While they were confined in the prison, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt each had a dream. Each man had his own dream during the same night. Each man's dream had its own meaning. Joseph came to them in the morning, looked at them, and saw that they were troubled. He asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so troubled today?" They said to him, "We each had a dream, but there is no one who can interpret it." Joseph said to them, "Interpretations belong to God, don't they? Please tell me the dreams." The chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me, and the vine had 3 branches. As I watched, it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. I had Pharaoh's cup in my hand. I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and handed the cup to Pharaoh. Joseph said to him, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office. You will place Pharaoh's cup into his hand, the way you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But remember me when everything is going well for you. Please show kindness to me, and mention me to Pharaoh, and bring me out of this jail, because I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and I also have done nothing here to deserve to be put into the dungeon.' When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, 'I also had a dream. I saw 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket there were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds ate them out of the basket on my head.' Joseph answered, 'This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from upon you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off of you.' And so it was that on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, Pharaoh had a feast prepared for all his officials, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position again, and he again placed the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had explained to them. Nevertheless, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." Genesis chapter 41, verses 1 through 57. At the end of 2 full years Pharaoh also had a dream. In the dream he was standing beside the river. There, right in front of him, 7 beautiful fat cows came up out of the river and were grazing in the marsh grass. Just then 7 ugly thin cows came up out of the river behind them, and they stood beside the other cows on the bank of the river. The ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 beautiful, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. Pharaoh fell asleep again and dreamed a second time. He saw 7 healthy, good heads of grain come up on one stalk. Right after that, 7 thin heads of grain, blasted by the east wind, sprang up after them. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Pharaoh woke up and realized that it was a dream. The next morning he was very troubled, so he sent for all of Egypt's magicians and wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I remember my faults. Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, me and the chief baker. We each had a dream during the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed a dream that had its own interpretation. There was a young man with us, a Hebrew, a servant to the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he gave the interpretation of his dream. It turned out exactly as he interpreted them for us. Pharaoh restored me to my office but hanged the chief baker. Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. Joseph shaved, changed his clothing, and went to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said about you, that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, It is not in my power. God will give Pharaoh an answer to give him peace of mind. Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, In my dream, there I was, standing on the bank of the river. Suddenly 7 fat, beautiful cows came up out of the river and were grazing in the marsh grass. Just then 7 poor cattle, very ugly and thin, came up after them. They were uglier than any I had ever seen in the whole land of Egypt. The thin, ugly cattle ate up the first 7 cattle, the fat ones, and when they had eaten them up, you could not even tell that they had eaten them, because they were still as ugly as they were at the beginning. Then I woke up. Later I had another dream, in which I saw 7 heads of grain grow on one stalk. They were full and good. Then I saw 7 heads of grain spring up after them. They were withered, thin, and blasted by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads of grain. I told the dream to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God has declared to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cattle are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one dream. The 7 thin, ugly cattle that came up after them are 7 years, and also the 7 empty heads of grain blasted by the east wind. They will be 7 years of famine. This is the very thing that I told Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Look, 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the whole land of Egypt. 7 years of famine will come up after them, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will consume the land, and the abundance will not be remembered in the land because of the famine that follows, for it will be very severe. The double dream was shown to Pharaoh, because this matter is established by God, and God will bring it to pass very soon. Let Pharaoh, therefore, look for a man who is wise and discerning, and set him over the land of Egypt. When Pharaoh does this, let him appoint overseers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. Let them collect all this food from these good years that are coming. Accumulate grain under the authority of Pharaoh to provide food for the cities, and let them store it. The food will be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that will take place in the land of Egypt so that the land does not perish because of the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials. Pharaoh said to his officials, Can we find anyone else like this man, a man who has the Spirit of God? Pharaoh said to Joseph, Because God has shown you all of this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you are. You shall be in charge of my house, and all my people will submit to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, Look, I have appointed you over the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh took his signet ring off of his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. He dressed Joseph in robes made from the best linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in the second best chariot that he had. Men went ahead of him crying out, Kneel down. Pharaoh appointed him over the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but in the whole land of Egypt no one will lift up his hand or his foot without your permission. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar priest of On, as a wife. Joseph went out and began to rule over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh king of Egypt. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and traveled throughout the whole land of Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance the earth produced plentiful harvests. He collected all the food during the 7 good years in the land of Egypt, and he stored up the food in the cities. In every city he stored the food from the fields that were around the city. Joseph stored up a huge amount of grain, like the sand of the sea. Finally he stopped keeping track, because it was too much to measure. 2 sons were born to Joseph before the first year of famine arrived. Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar priest of On, gave birth to them. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, because he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's house. He named the second son Ephraim. He said, "Yes, God has made me fruitful in the land where I was afflicted." So the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end. The 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every land, but in the whole land of Egypt there was bread. When the whole land of Egypt was starving, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Do whatever he tells you." The famine spread over the face of the whole earth. Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. The famine was severe in the land of Egypt. The whole world came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe all over the whole world.